You know, if you're an artist or illustrator at whatever level that struggled with perspective and maybe even given up on it, this one sheet of paper I'm going to show you could maybe change your entire understanding of it and maybe your life in that way. So this one piece of paper, what is it? It's a cube, and I'll explain. So I'm going to get into a book too. There's one book I'm going to show you that could also make a big difference to you. It made a big difference to me when I found it. So as ever, I'm going to just improvise this and kind of try and explain concepts that are all surrounding perspective drawing and how to achieve the illusion of depth. So really what my intro is, this piece of paper. It's a flattened out cube, and when you, like I just printed this out, I found a version of this on the internet, changed it around a bit, added the grid to it on a layer, and flattened the file, printed it out, cut it out, and then I made a cube. So here you go. Now it's a little bit of a wonky cube, it's not perfect, but that doesn't really matter. But it's got a center line, which I didn't thicken, but there's a number of units where these center lines go through the middle. Could even maybe take a red marker and make that center line, the crosshair, emphasized. But anyway, it's a little bit wonky, but why does this matter? Okay, we're going to get into that. Well, it matters because there are two different kinds of perspective. There's scientific kind of book learning perspective, which is usually what everybody trips over. They stumble over it. It's kind of mathematical. And it, for a lot of people who are artistic, I guess they focus on the more emotive or intuitive, reflexive kind of side of things. They don't want to get into the mathematical and analytical. Well, that's unfortunate, but because I think you really need both. But it's also that the way it's presented, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It's not a logical presentation, and it just seems like a very mystical subject, like perspective drawing. It seems frustrating, and again, in a lot of books, they take a very kind of mathematical approach, and that can be frustrating. What I'm going to recommend is that you do a kind of life drawing. Like, you go to life drawing with models. You study anatomy. You get your models to, the guy's arms have fallen off. This is like a 3D printed model I bought, which is really quite good. But, you go to life drawing, you study the poses. And what are you doing? You're getting research, and you're getting it locked in your brain like images and impressions that are going to stay in your memory that you can pull out, so that when you think about drawing a figure from a different angle, whatever angle it is, you've got something in there to pull out and put onto the paper. And what I'm going to propose is that it's the same with perspective drawing. So you need a sense of cubic space, three-dimensional space. And here we have a cube, which has the three axes, width, depth, and height. Got to be gentle with my cube here because it's just made on ordinary paper and it's a little dented already. But you need these three things: depth, width, height, to get a sense of depth. Now, perspective drawing, it's a way of creating in a two-dimensional surface the illusion of depth. And I think at this point I'll introduce another little aspect before I start drawing and show you what I can think of. Is that I came across this book by Ernest W. Watson, and it's an older book, and it just revolutionized my world and understanding of how to draw in perspective, because unlike a lot of books, it covers both things, and it's really in the title. How to use creative perspective. Perspective, let's say, is just that scientific, ruler, go to a vanishing point, all that seemingly boring stuff. It can actually become quite fascinating when you unlock it and you go through this one doorway and you're inside this world, and now you understand a lot more. It's like that with a lot of things. You never know when one more drawing, one more little bit of knowledge suddenly goes poof, and you have an epiphany, and it's like, again, going through a doorway into just a completely different room of the building, and you suddenly understand. But anyway, in the title, that perspective, that's the scientific side. But what he did is he put in the title is how to use creative perspective. And this, unlike many other books I had seen, it kind of rocked my world, because, as I'll show you inside, he has some technical stuff, which is the perspective side, but he also has creative, like how to use it creatively in illustrations. And even though it's an older book that's got older illustrators, they're all wonderful illustrators, and it's still incredibly useful information you can apply to anything you're doing nowadays. It's timeless because it's truthful. And just a note, if you go and look for this, if you search, for example, on Amazon, Ernest W. Watson, it's been retitled, I think now it's called Creative Perspective for Artists and Illustrators. And Dover Books, which is a reprint book publisher, I just looked on Amazon.ca here in Canada. They've got one for $20, 19 and change. So it's affordable. And, you know, if you invest the time to read this book, yeah, you got to read a book, but it's like the one single book that's just fantastic. Fantastic. And I'm not going to do, it's actually falling apart. I'm not going to do an entire video here. That's not my purpose for this video, to do a review of this book, although I should, and I probably will. My idea here is to introduce that this book encapsulated creative perspective. Like he says right here in the introduction, what is creative perspective? And he analyzes top illustrators, and he shows how they learn the rules, but then so-called break them. Because that's another whole thing right there. Like often you have people who say, just fudge it, you know. Or I had one person I used to know, an artist who'd just do something kind of hacky and sloppy and then say, it's close enough for jazz, which is an insult to jazz, because jazz is actually done by, good jazz is done by skilled musicians who improvise along a framework, and it can be quite wonderful when well done. And so, you know, you can have good fudging and sloppy fudging, right? Fudging being when you break the rules or loosen things up a bit. You know, like, you should learn the rules and learn how things work, and then you can improvise around them. And I'm looking for this page that really made a huge difference. There's a page by Robert Fawcett that really, I see these great older illustrations. There's a page in here that I should have bookmarked. So here he gets into, I'm jumping around here, but this book has all kinds of useful information, very, very well explained. You do have to go through a bunch of reading, but it's very well explained about some of the technical sides of drawing and foreshortening, which I'll get into in a second. This is great, the House of Seven Vanishing Points, and how to align different vanishing points with horizon lines. But and how to exaggerate and manipulate perspective that you're doing. Yeah, this is the page I was looking for. So this spread alone, I remember. I'll explain a bit more about this book, and then I'll go to my own, some tips. This spread alone made a huge difference, because you can look at this, like this is a masterful illustration. I'll zoom in, by a man named Robert Fawcett, who did tons of magazine illustration in black and white and color. This is a black and white reproduction of probably a color illustration. Just incredibly well drawn. And you know, you look at this cold and you go, wow, that's incredible perspective, depth and stuff. But when you have a really brilliant analysis, as the author of this book did, and it's here, printed here, and it's about how vanishing points and vanishing points have been manipulated, basically, that it's the right kind of fudging, not the bad kind of, just do whatever and say it's good enough. So it's manipulation of the rules of perspective, using knowledge, but doing it very skillfully. And that's where this title comes in, Creative Perspective. So I'll put that away for a second. Again, I recommend looking that up. Ernest W. Watson. And, you know, again, it's a book to read, but it's like this one book. You read this and you understand the concepts. It changes your life, really. And suddenly perspective is not this super annoying kind of stumbling block where everybody, you know, if you don't understand it, like I said earlier in the video, it seems very mystical and it's like, this doesn't look right. And often that's because you're trying to do things either too scientifically and you don't make those creative adjustments like this book shows how to do, or you go the other way and you just kind of fudge everything. You just draw some random thing with no rules or scientific perspective behind it. And then it also doesn't work right. So on one hand, like it's the super tight kind of things you see people do where it's very mechanically ruled into one vanishing point, but there's no life to it. And then the other hand is the way too rubbery and crazy or non-existent sort of sense of perspective. So here, what I want to get into is a few simple things, and then I'll probably end this video because, like I say in all these videos, there's endless stuff you could get into. These videos are really meant as prompts for you to go and investigate and crack the subject open yourself, but in a new way, not in the frustrated way. So I said earlier, life drawing for perspective. Life drawing for perspective would be you make something simple like this. It's fun to make. You fold up that, you know, like when you take this printout, which, by the way, I'll try and remember to put on my Art Principles Instagram. I'll put a scan of this and you can just print it out and cut it out yourself. And, you know, you just fold these up. These are tabs here that you just fold in on the inside and glue. I just used like a glue stick, you know. And then you've got your own little perspective cube. I mean, you don't even have to do this if you've got a really good cube already. I'll show you one I made earlier, but this is not a cube. But I made this earlier out of, I don't know, styrofoam or something. It's not actually a cube though, because it's more of a rectangle. But again, it's all good for perspective learning. Because the more you draw this, the more you internalize it, then it's in your brain. And you then acquire a sense for yourself, just like you would acquire a sense of the figure by doing life drawing. You acquire a sense of perspective and convergence and rightness by internalizing it, by actually drawing in real life with your own two eyes. Because there's a fundamental difference when you draw something right in front of you in real space with your own two eyes. Your brain has to combine the two sets of information from one eye and the other, and in a new way. And then you yourself come up with the shape. So first thing I want to say here is there's a thing called convergence. It's like how steep, I'm going to use a marker. Give me a second. So it's like, I'm going to zoom in. How steep or how flat. See, that's more gentle and that's steeper. And then you can get really super steep, like. So that's going to relate to, like, they're all going to a point there. These ones are going to a point here. And these ones would be, the point would now be way up further. Now, why does that matter? Because it has to do with the impression of depth. Like, see, when this is far away, I'm going to zoom back again so we can see. When this is far away, it's that flatter convergence. And it's a relationship between you and the size of the object. And I'll get into that in a second. It's called field of vision. Like, if you think of from a top view, here's your eyeball. I think I was trying to look it up. There are different sources on the internet that if this is a person from above, here's me looking, or you, your eyes have an angle of vision, because obviously you can't see completely off to the side. But you get into your peripheral vision when you're over here. There's like a central angle of vision. And one source was saying that it's 120 degrees, which would be wider, something like this. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it really doesn't matter to get sort of, pedantic or fussy about the exact number. The idea is that you have this central cone of vision where you see things within it. If you get to the edges of it, if it's filling your vision, you get more distortion. So for this, it would be like, see how the angles are flatter, but then if I keep the same angle, see how it comes up, these side angles here, like the angle on one side, it gets much more extreme, right? Because it's so much closer. So, and then of course, I'm not changing the angle of this, but of course, if you do that, then even at a distance, like you can get more extreme angles. So see here, it's flatter because it's square onto you. Whatever, trying to get it right. And then, you know, you tilt, everything converges. So the spacing's all changed too here, and that's called foreshortening. See that the horizontal ones here change their position. And even in this recording, it's all dictated by the angle of vision of this iPhone. It's got its own kind of angle of vision, which is a different angle, like the lens, than a human eye would, which is another reason to point back to and say, use your own eyes to learn things. Anyway, for now, I'm stuck with recording this on an iPhone. You make this and you can do a kind of life drawing of it. Like if I go out of my head and try and start drawing cubes, I'm going to see what I can do here. Now see, the problem here, see I'm drawing this one? I'm going to zoom in again. Make it a bit clearer. Question becomes something called foreshortening. And this is gently foreshortening. Is like, how far is this to make that an accurate cube? Did I get that spacing right? And then here, where do I end this? Is it down here or is it up here? What, you know, where would be too short? Like, I use a pencil. If I stop this there, does that look like a cube to you? See there? Looks too short to me. Or it's down here, is that too long? It looks like a rectangle. So you can answer these questions by learning to sketch this. Like you just put it there, you sketch it accurately. So for me, I'm going to say probably somewhere it feels like here. And that might even be a little too long. But I use the word purposely feel and feeling. It's you acquire a sense of what looks right because you're basing your decisions about what to leave in or change or where to put your lines. You're making choices and you're basing it on your internal sense of what looks proper. If your sense of what looks proper has not been conditioned by studying this, studying convergences and spacings, which you learn from just even a simple cube like this, if it's off and doesn't correspond to what resonates to other people in reality, then your drawings won't have that feeling of depth because things will be all discoordinated. And what you can do is, moving on, what you can do is do that thing which I showed in another video, which is I'm going to do this from my angle of vision, so it's going to look off to you guys. But what I do is I close one eye. I'm holding this cube. I'm going to hold it in a way where I can get the different points. What I'm doing is closing one eye. You can't see that because I'm off camera. I'm just going to mark a point for each corner by not moving the cube and just quickly. It won't line up on what you're seeing because, darn, I moved my paper. So much for preparation. The camera, the iPhone here is from above and it's not going to look like it lines up to you, but to me it looks like it's lines up. If you try this, you'll see what I mean. So I've marked the corner points. The only point I can't mark easily without moving the cube away is the internal corner, which I'm going to just quickly see if it lines up. Roughly there. So then when I get my trusty ruler here and just quickly just connect those. Did I do my right corner? Let's check it again. I forgot the last corner. All right, what the hell? Close enough for jazz. Maybe that guy was right. I think you'll see the concept anyway. The concept is here. I'm just tracing off real life. And that was this corner here. It's like this. Anyway, something like that, right? The you'll presumably bear with me and see that, okay, so it's a way of training yourself and internalizing it by doing the drawing. You put it in your hand, you put it in your brain. And again, you can either do it this way by trying to, trace, set up a thing like this and just do different angles and proximities. Or you could just hold it off to the side and just sketch it like you would a life drawing model, which is great too. Or you could set up a box, some boxes, anything cubic or rectangular, and practice just drawing with your own eyes. But so, that's one example. Let's do another. Let's do something closer. See if I can do a little better this time. Well, actually, the angle from what you guys are seeing is completely different than what I'm seeing, so you'll see that in a second. It's kind of fun. I just like this game. Oh, damn. Okay, swearing on camera. Okay, it's an upshot. I didn't do the internal corner, but you see you've got these angles here. So I might be in trouble here, but I have to estimate that one. I'm going to estimate this one too because I think my cube moved. Well, it's not bad. This doesn't look right though. See, because what you want is these to swing along, the verticals. You've got a 3-point perspective here because you've got, these are all converging to a point like way down there, and the other ones are converging to a point the other way, way down there. And then the verticals are converging as well. So I think let's just do a little bit more. And one other thing, I'll introduce this. One other thing you learn from studying this carefully is something about spacing. So see, imagine you're drawing rocks on a field, on a flat plane, or blades of grass, let's say. And imagine that each little intersection here where each line crosses on this grid, imagine you plant a blade of grass, or you place a stone, or put a tree there, whatever it might be that you're putting in your drawing. So you get into this thing of convergence, which is, you've seen this before in other videos. That's the center line there. And we've got our vanishing point here. And this would be the horizon line. That's the center point. It's not the same as the horizon line. Horizon line is just where your eye level is. And again, I'd have to make more videos to explain all these things. Otherwise, if I go into that now, I'll digress too much. But I just want to show you the spacing. See how these spacing of these changes. So if this is a given, if this depth is a cube here, let's say it's there, then there's that basic trick that shows in that book, and everybody learns in perspective, for doing spacing using the center line and the diagonal, just doing it roughly. So what do you see here? You see that sense of how those are not evenly spaced, but they're converging at a certain rate. And the steeper you make this, like the first one might be like that now if it's a cube, because it's turned much more steeply like this. Then the next are going to much more rapidly close in. Then this is all wonky, but it's kind of fun, rubbery. Yeah, so the spacing, the steeper that you get more convergence of these two outer angles, like that. Compared to here, it's flatter, but you also get a tightening of the spacing. And my point about all this is that you need to internalize a sense of what looks proper about that. And there's no other way to do it than by studying real-world objects. Like you can do all the sitting with a piece of paper like this and not doing the actual life drawing thing I'm recommending, you won't get that internalized sense. It'll be too much mathematical. Just like, for example, if you see comic book artists that have only studied anatomy from other comic book artists and from anatomy books, they might sometimes know very well all the muscles and the little details of which muscle is where, and the deltoid, and the you know, where the femur is, and all these different things. But you can see right away that they've never gone and drawn a model, a living flesh model in life drawing, because it looks too mechanical and diagrammatical. So it's the same with this stuff, is that if you want a living feeling of depth, and for things like spacings, you need to actually put it in your brain using a method like what I'm recommending. So going back to what I was saying earlier, if you have something like, you're drawing here's like some kind of field, and you're drawing stones, you're going to have a sense of like convergence. See, say they're random, I don't know what they are, but they're random flagstony things. You're going to have a sense of spacing and size. That one's maybe a little bigger than the others. See, these ones are too equal, so it's kind of killing the depth. What you need is that sense of things diminishing down to a vanishing point. Another little tip, for example, this gets into all kinds of things like this about what I call the 2D language. It's the language of how you arrange things. It's not simply mechanical rules. Another little tip I was going to say was what I call a rule of threes, is that if you're spacing things in a drawing and you've only got 2 going in the distance, that should be flattening. You always seem to need a minimum of 3. So like 3 things, like 3 lampposts, these are like crappy lampposts. Because it gives you a sense of depth. 2 doesn't seem to be enough. It's too binary. And that's one little thing I always use, is just try and find any example of something repetitive that you can use to put depth. Because if it's a repetitive element, whether that could be like a tree or any repeat element in architecture, for example, or figures, it gives your eye comparison of size of the same thing by going down away in space. And that resonates in the mind, and it gets a feeling of depth. Whereas if it's all 3 different objects of different sizes and scales and proportions, then you don't get that same effect. So again, an understanding of this, whether this be stones or grass, like say you've got let's try it this way. You've got a field and you've got grass here. You might tighten it up and make more of them. And in the foreground, and this is like creative perspective. It's not mathematical lines-based perspective, but it's picture making things. I'm making them much smaller and tighter. Again, on the idea that if they're going back in space, things of the same size are going to converge. And you always have to think about it that way with what you're doing and your different elements. Of course, you've got a natural thing here that the farther away stuff goes, if you drew every blade of grass, you're eventually going to plug the thing up because you've got so many things you're drawing. So then what you have to be doing is, as you go away, you're kind of actually eliminating some. And you might even turn it into an outline like that. And this is getting more into talk about rendering and inking and stuff. But anyway, I'm going to round off there. It's been half an hour. I hope that's of some use to you. And really, the main takeaway is creative perspective is what you want to learn, not just rigid, boring perspective rules. Those all have their place, and that kind of deep knowledge definitely is useful. But if it's not modified by the ability to use creativity and adjust things, and there's endless things to learn about that, which are covered in that book, and I'm going to hopefully make more videos about this kind of thing. if you don't modify it with that creative element, then you kind of get stuck, and you also get frustrated. And usually people do get stuck. They run afoul of this stuff, and then they just ditch the whole thing and say, I don't want to draw in perspective. It's too confusing. And it's because of the design/creative element is not understood, how to integrate it into a composition. So that's my one thing, is understand creative perspective, not just perspective. The other point is do life drawing with something actual, physical, and practice it. And you do it for a little bit, you'll instantly see how the next time you go to draw your drawing, you're going to have a sense of what looks right and what looks wrong, because you've built it into your mind, and you have something to compare against when you're making choices like, oh, should I go this way or that way? And you can even go further. Like you could even, some artists make maquettes, like you could build a little structure easily out of paper for your little town or alleyway. You could shoot photos of it or just draw it. Anything like that is very, very useful. You know, you can even take things that are not meant to be that and just adopt their perspective, like turn this into a spaceship or something, you know, like, so any practice like that is, in the real world, is what I'm saying is going to be extremely valuable. And it's all the more so in these days of Photoshop, computers, 3D programs, posing apps, all that stuff. It can be good when you already understand this stuff within yourself, but if you plunge right into that, you can easily get a slick result. Like you can do Photoshop and gloss in all these colors and effects and fancy kind of rendering. But if the underlying drawing isn't working, it's just never going to make a difference. You can't polish it enough to make it shiny. It just still won't look right. So that's where some of this learning comes in. As ever, thank you for watching, and please like, comment, share, subscribe, describe, recommend, and that's all going to help my channel keep growing. Again, have a good day, and thanks for listening. Happy perspective drawing. Bye for now.